was. I always do water. Okay, back to you, back to the chat. Let's take a look at Alan. Alan, please review all the games published in the New York Times. Well, that'd be an interesting. I think that might need its own separate stream on a different mountain. Okay, Galerians from Adult Occult. Shout out to Adult Occult in the chat with a great game review. Now, Galerians is a tough game because I do think that it has a interesting pedigree in that it is, of course, it is an action horror game in the vein of Japanese science fiction movies such as Akira that sort of blend aspects of horror and science fiction together. Now, Galerians of Ash is, of course, a kid wakes up in a, kind of one of those kind of kid explodes heads kind of games, and it's a little janky, and it's graphics haven't aged terribly, but it's certainly worth a look to see what other people were thinking that they could do with the survival horror, with the kind of survival horror genre as it was finding its footing in that early period around the original Resident Evil and Silent Hill games. There's several other Galerians games, I believe, Galerians Ash, and there might have been a Galerians 3. If you're sounding Adult Occult, if you're in the chat and if you're a Galerians fan, you probably know if there is a third Galerians game. But I would say that Galerians, without going into a lot of detail, because it has been a great deal of time has passed, I will say that Galerians gets probably somewhere between a 5.5 and a 6 out of 10. It stays above average for me because it has such a unique perspective on the action horror genre, along similar lines as something like Parasite Eve or Dino Crisis. Linda Cubed, I don't know, mosquito. No mosquito. Joseph says, are there mosquitoes out there? There are no mosquitoes out here. There is a very nice, warm, moist breeze coming in from the ocean that I can feel at this moment here on EGI 2. And there, if you can see there, it's beautiful downtown Los Angeles on a Friday night. The whole city looks like a big Christmas tree. So if you're into Christmas, then this looks like a Christmas tree to me. All right, so the Dino Crisis mentioned, yes, I did mention Dino Crisis. Shout out to Vague Plague for mentioning that I mentioned Dino Crisis, and want to say that Dino Crisis was Dino Crisis on? Let me get the bag out. Dino Crisis is an interesting game. Dino Crisis 2. So Dino Crisis 2 is, of course, one of the games that I actually brought up to the mountain to review this evening on EGI 2 Outdoor Game Reviews. Which only 2 Galerian games. Thanks, wonder if you Adult Occult. Oh, so there were only 2 Galerian games. I could have sworn there was Galerians 3, but thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the review, Adult Occult. I'm sorry I couldn't go more into how you properly save your game in Galerians, but it has been quite a while. But if you're interested in seeing how where the survival horror genre that exists today, with all of its, I would say with the bouquet of experiences that you can possibly have in a survival horror game. It didn't used to always be that way. It was a lot of plucky people trying different things and taking a lot of chances, and I think that there's no better example of that than the Galerians game. And I think that there could be a better example than Galerians, which I think is Dino Crisis 2. Now, Dino Crisis 2 takes a lot of the same cues from the first Dino Crisis 2, but rather than having with the fixed camera angles that you see in those that you do see in those Capcom survival horror, those early Capcom survival horror games, but Dino Crisis 2 brings back in a lot of the pre-rendered backdrops rather than sticking with the real-time engine backdrops, and so you get a lot more color in Dino Crisis 2 than you got in the original Dino Crisis. And you also get something very interesting to me, which is that you get a combat system that in many ways is very similar to the combat system that would come to us from the Devil May Cry games on the PlayStation when they originally started popping out on the PlayStation 2. It's not quite as fluid, it's not quite as flashy, but there is something in the way that the combo system works with the guns that you can use in Dino Crisis 2, that reminds a lot, that I would say is a very clear precursor to the Devil May Cry series. It has a very similar storyline of you're in a scientific situation and the dinosaurs get out and you have to fight your way out to safety through the course of a very dark and wild evening in the dinosaur world. And I think that it's a game that has aged somewhat well, especially for the older style of those Capcom fixed angle survival horror games. And I would love to see a remake of the original Dino Crisis games. Shout to the past. If you want to see is there a third Galerian? No, there's not a third Galerian.